All right, joining me is Jake Madison, who's the host of the Locked On Pelicans and Locked On NBA podcast. And because you're a New Orleans reporter following the team, we have to ask the heartbreaking question that everyone around the NBA is asking after we saw the Pelicans lose to the Lakers in the in-season tournament last week. Is Zion Williamson fat, or is maybe people just kind of overreacting to like maybe one bad game?
Yeah, look, there's a lot to this. Right off the bat, he's not fat. He's not maybe in the best shape he could possibly be in, but I think the stuff about his weight gets overblown, right? This is a guy who on Monday night against the best defense in the NBA went out and put up 36 points pretty easily against the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you're fat, you're out of shape. You can't do that. Like no one's going to be able to do that sort of thing. That said, is he living up to his full potential? Like, absolutely not. He can be better than what he is. And I think that's where some of the frustration around Zion Williamson comes down to. And this is what they said on Inside the NBA on TNT with Shaq and Charles Barkley, saying he's just kind of playing off his potential, right? He's not actively going out and giving maybe the effort that he needs to be giving on a consistent basis, right? This is a guy who's gotten better as this season has gone on. And beyond that Lakers game was putting up numbers from last season where he was an all-star starter and would have made all NBA had he finished playing the season, not been hurt, and played more than 29 games. So, with Zion, it's kind of like the give and take of that. There's so much potential there. He could easily be a top 5 offensive player, but is he actually reaching that? And I think it's fair to say no, he isn't. And that's why kind of the narrative comes for him all the time. I think the past week, this stuff has been a little bit overblown beyond that Lakers game. The previous 10 games, he was averaging like 27 points, almost 6 assists and 5 rebounds while shooting 68%, I think it was, from the field. Those are really, really good numbers. So, if you had looked around the league the past week, you would have thought that this is a guy who's averaging 10 points per game all season, and that simply isn't the case. So I think some of that was a little bit overblown, but some of the criticism under the surface of him not living up to his potential, not doing as much as he could to be kind of like a consummate professional NBA player, yeah, that's totally valid and true.
Just going back to like Zion at the start of his career, because him playing at Duke was just very like unique and like something we really either we hadn't seen it before or we hadn't seen it in a very long time. And he played with like just kind of like a lot of energy and a lot of joy. And if you watch Zion now, like you said, he's a very productive player. I think just like he still has that like kind of what you said, that potential athleticism where he can still kind of get around a lot of people and like he's so big and strong that he can just finish around the rim like better than like anyone in the NBA. And but if you just kind of watch him overall now, it seems like there's like in a way like a laziness to his game, which it's like it's not like he's like not trying out there, but there seems like there's this laziness and lack of joy. And I was just kind of thinking like how did we get here where like I've come up with like my theories, like maybe the organization when they like drafted him, because if you go back in time, it's like Anthony Davis is getting ready to leave and go to the Lakers, and it's kind of like, oh my god, like we lost it with this Anthony Davis thing. We didn't necessarily do the right things to like get the right talent around him, maybe the right coaching around him to make him want to stay. Now I think that's a little overblown because like they did get Drew Holiday, did get DeMarcus Cousins, then he tears his Achilles unfortunately, and I think like because of that they've in a lot of ways, like at least the beginning part of his career, really babied him. Like how did we get here from when he was this guy that was drafted with all this potential that had all of this joy playing to like now where it's kind of like we're kind of just looking at him and he's still a productive player. He might make the All-Star team again this year, but we're just kind of disappointed.
I think it's the injuries more than anything. His career just hasn't gone the way that we were expecting or that he probably would have hoped, right? It goes back to his rookie year where before the start of the season, he, played a couple of preseasons games, then had the torn MCL in his knee or whatever it was that he dealt with during that time. And it caused him to miss more than half of the season. And by the time he came back, COVID had hit. We were going through like the bubble and all of that sort of stuff. And he just kind of wasn't the same. The next year under Stan Van Gundy, he was a productive player, had his healthiest year, But Stan Van Gundy was definitely not the right coach for the Pelicans, and there's a reason they fired him after 1 year. So now, on top of the injuries, he's got a lot of like inconsistency, lack of stability around him when it comes to the organization. And then, of course, there's the year right after that where he sits out the whole year. And when you look at it, it's just those lack of games, has put him under a bigger microscope. That's always going to be the case for Zion Williamson. Look, this guy has been in the public eye, the public spotlight since he was like 12, 14, something along those lines, right? And now it's just magnified on the biggest stage of the NBA. And that's why it's so unfortunate that in arguably the biggest game of his career, the one with the most stakes, that in-season tournament semifinal game against the Los Angeles Lakers in Vegas, he had a stinker of a game, just bombed that one, right? 13 points, just couldn't get anything going, and it's even magnified because you kind of have the foil in LeBron James right there, who like went out and was like being very serious, taking this game very seriously, brought an energy level that the younger Zion just didn't match. And it leads to these kind of questions and puts him right in the crosshairs of everything. There's also been missteps on like his part too. He probably hasn't spoken to the media nearly as much as he should, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's struggles with his weight, eating, what have you. And I don't know if any of this is exactly there or not because he doesn't speak on it. If he'd come out and said some of those things, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm going through, I think that makes him a much more sympathetic figure, being vulnerable like that. But that's also hard for professional athletes to do. So when you look at it, it just led to this like mix of stuff, perfect storm around him of, oh yeah, this just puts tons of pressure on him and probably makes it less fun for him than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, I've listened to like a few of his press conferences in the past. He comes off as like a very likable person. Like there's some player, like a lot of players do. That's like really kind of one of the bright spots of the NBA is that a lot of these guys are like really likable. I mean, like maybe there's some that don't come off as likable. I might just keep some of their names absent right now. Oh, you mentioned the stuff with the injuries. That's one thing that I've been very through like out his entire career with New Orleans. And that's kind of what I was saying with like the franchise babying him a little bit. At least me, I mean, you cover the team, you're very connected with it or very much like, informed in like every aspect of it. It feels like a lot of times there's times that he could have played and he didn't, and it felt like the franchise was just like so worried that like he's either gonna like hurt himself or just very much worried about him and didn't want to like damage him. And I think maybe doing that in a way kind of like hurt his like overall development.
Yeah, I think when you look at it like that, that's definitely the truth. They treated him with kids gloves because this organization realized, and you've seen it from this, right? They've made one playoff series without Zion Williamson. They lost in the first round of the Phoenix Suns. They didn't have him last year. They lost in the play-in tournament opening game to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They know that if they want to win a championship, if they want to go deep into the playoffs, it's going to be with Zion Williamson out there on the court, and that's one of the reasons why they've almost tried to like save him from himself, protect him from himself at times, I think. And that's caused friction between him and the organization. He wants to go out and play. I can tell you this dude loves playing basketball. And so when the organization holds him back, whether it was his rookie year coming back and they had him on minutes restrictions, things like that, that first game back against the San Antonio Spurs was a close game, final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, and they didn't let Zion play because he'd reached his allotment of minutes. That's something that frustrated him. But at the same time, if he goes out there and gets hurt, that's not going to help him. That's not going to help this team win in the postseason either. So it's trying to find that right balancing act. But that's also created a lot of friction between Zion and the organization. There is definitely a lack of trust there between Zion and other players too. And the medical staff, that's why they restructured that this offseason, getting rid of some people, bringing in some new ones, really trying to get the players' input on that to make them feel more comfortable and to try and find the right sort of balance between everything.
So this team right now is like sitting in this like hodgepodge of like all of the West teams, or all the West teams are like very, very close in record, but it's like 10 or 12 teams. So right now you're like sitting at like what, ninth? And I'm just kind of like wondering with this team because there's a lot of like say what you want about the front office, talent acquisition really has not been a problem. Seems like every time the Pelicans these last few years have been getting a draft pick, it's been turned out to be like a very productive role player, whether it be Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Alvarado. We saw like Hawkins, who's kind of like really kind of like surprised me with how, important he has been in some of these games for the Pelicans this year. Like, what is this team? What should they do? What should their direction be going into this season in the next like 3 or 4 with this Zion window, or maybe even Zion's not a part of it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think they're still trying to figure some of that out, right? When you look at the Western Conference, it's tough. It's pretty stacked there. You really only have two teams that aren't competing, and that's Portland and the San Antonio Spurs, right? Even Memphis, who's at the bottom, is going to get Ja Morant back within the week. You have Houston that's trying to win games. Utah maybe isn't, but most teams are out there trying to be competitive, I think, at the moment, and they want to win. And that's why you have the Pelicans sitting ninth in the West, but I do think they're probably better than that. What I think this team needs more than anything is just a little bit of time. They're finally starting to get healthy for the first time this season, like the first time ever, maybe, where you have everybody playing essentially other than Larry Nance Jr. for the roster. You've seen Trey Murphy come back. He's a really key player for this team. He was just 6 of 7 from 3 the other night. And when you add those guys into the mix, CJ McCollum's healthy after having that punctured / collapsed lung earlier in the year. You're seeing them reach some of their potential. Over the past 2 weeks, right, they've beaten the Sacramento Kings, who are top 6 team in the West. They've beaten the Denver Nuggets. They've beaten the Dallas Mavericks. They've beaten Minnesota on Monday, and they were competitive against Minnesota a couple weeks ago when they didn't have Zion and Minnesota was at full strength. I think they've shown they can really compete with most teams in the Western Conference, so they feel that they can definitely make a run. They're in an interesting situation when you look at it with the salary cap. They're over the luxury tax line right now. This is one of 2 franchises that's never paid the luxury tax in NBA history. Them and Charlotte are the only 2 teams. I don't know if this roster is worth paying the luxury tax for if you're only going to do that once, twice, not every single year. And with the way the new CBA is structured, with the repeater tax being a little bit stiffer, with those penalties being more punitive, I don't know if you want to start that clock ticking this year. So as you look at them, on the short end of the timeline this season, I think they're going to try and trade a guy like Kyra Lewis Jr., just dump him and basically get out of the luxury tax, roll with this team, because I think they feel it can definitely be competitive enough, especially if some of the younger guys like Trey Murphy and maybe 1 or 2 others take a slight leap forward. Beyond that is when you have some valid questions, and it might depend on how this season ends. If Zion and Brandon Ingram don't finish the season healthy, you have to look at trading them. I can tell you they looked at trading both those guys at various times. There was a lot of talk about the Pelicans being interested in Scoot Henderson this offseason. They definitely were. Zion could have been on the block for that, was on the block for that. Same for Brandon Ingram. Trade didn't end up materializing. It's been reported they kicked around, floating Zion in trades 2 seasons ago as well, just to see. It's tough to build around a guy that doesn't play, which is the problem for Zion Williamson and to a lesser extent Brandon Ingram too. If both those guys finish the season healthy and they make some noise, whatever that is, in the postseason, I think they're going to feel really good about going forward. But if Zion misses half the season again, or BI misses half the season again, I think they're going to just realize this is untenable and look to make changes. So their long-term timeline, it still remains to be seen what they need to be doing, what they should be doing, and it might be determined by health and how they finish this year.
Yeah, if you're not willing to like spend the luxury tax like at least like a few times, it's just very hard to compete. I didn't know that stat that it was only New Orleans and the Hornets. That's like a
Mm-hmm.
really fun and interesting stat. I mean, the Pelicans have had like more reasons to like Charlotte hasn't necessarily
Right.
other than like other than just being reckless, but I don't know. Maybe now that MJ's gone, maybe they'll get a little frisky with that. Um, it's about like 4.5 years since the Anthony Davis trade. And at the time when this trade happened, the Pelicans get all these pieces. They get any young guy that they won from the Lakers except Kuzma. They get Ingram, who at the time had like a diminished value because he had that blood clot thing in his shoulder. I believe it was what it was. Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, and then all of these draft picks. And I was just kind of like thinking about it today. You did use like one of the picks that you traded back, got Jackson Hayes. Then you had Dyson Daniels in that trade too, who when he's played has been, I think, a pretty solid player for you guys. Has the Pelicans gotten like really their fair value out of that trade, or maybe if you're going to look at kind of criticisms with this front office, they haven't necessarily like parlayed those assets into anything that is really kind of like helping this team build and like become a playoff contender and win a playoff series.
I think it's a mixed bag on things. With that trade, you're never going to get full value, right? Equal value for a superstar. And Anthony Davis definitely was that at the time, still is, right? Like that's they there was only so much you're going to be able to recoup. So I think when you look at the value they got for him overall in a vacuum, that trade does look very good compared to other superstar trades at times. And if you compare it to like more modern things like Rudy Gobert, some of those other deals, you kind of are like, wait, what? And this is what the Pelicans got, and that looks good. I think with some of them. You have Brandon Ingram, who is a core foundational piece for this franchise, someone they're building around. Dyson Daniels is still a guy they view as a future player. Herb Jones was also like factored into that trade too as a second round pick that got swapped around a couple of times from assets in that deal. You had to include guys like Josh Hart, who you had come over for that trade in the deal for CJ McCollum too. So I think New Orleans has done a good enough job of taking what they got in that. Certainly some of the draft picks, things like that, haven't looked the best overall. And maybe some of those assets, they were maybe banking on the Lakers falling apart a little bit. Same thing with Drew Holiday in that Milwaukee trade where they tried to kick those picks as far down the road as they could and hope that maybe you outlast the team. That hasn't ended up happening. That's the risk you take in some of that. But when you look at this roster, for a small market team that isn't a free agent destination, to have Brandon Ingram here who signed an extension, right? CJ McCollum is still a very useful player, signed an extension. Larry Nance Jr., who's a good backup big that is tangentially tied to that trade. I think they've done a very good job overall of building a lot of talent here. And that's why at one point this team was kind of considered like the darlings of the NBA, like a young up and coming team. The injuries to Zion, Brandon Ingram, and the way last season ended have kind of taken the shine off a little bit. But you look at them beating a lot of these top teams regularly in the NBA right now. So the talent's still here, and that started with that Anthony Davis trade, really.
Yeah, I didn't get to this part of your podcast the other day because I was listening to this episode right before it aired. You said something about like you did a really good tease about like the New Orleans arena and potentially like building another one. Is that something that's in the works? Like, what's going on with that situation?
So the Smoothie King Center where they play now, you could argue is like the worst NBA arena out there currently. It's built in the early 2000s. Maybe it's built in 99. I can't remember exactly when. Like it's out of date. It's not a great facility. Like it's fine. You want to go and watch basketball and sit in a seat and watch a game and don't need amenities. That's fine. But you need all of these teams do, especially in a small market. You need any sort of like competitive advantage you can get. If that's nice locker rooms that make your players happy to be in there, that's good. You also need to generate more revenue because you don't have the same local TV deals as the Lakers and some of these other teams out there. A new arena is going to generate more revenue for you. So it's something that I think they definitely need to consider and look at. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. And it stands in stark contrast to, say, the Oklahoma City Thunder, who just had a citywide vote to approve building a new arena. When you look at the future of this team too, I also think it's really important. You can go back 10, 15 years. There were attendance benchmarks they needed to hit. Otherwise, they could opt out of the lease with the arena, with the state, potentially move at that point. If you want the future of the Pelicans to like really remain in New Orleans and have there be no doubts about that, a new arena is basically the only way to do that. Right now, they're renovating the Superdome where the Saints play. That's kind of the priority, and nothing is going to get done on a new arena, NBA arena, anytime before that's being finished. There's another year or two, I think, on that. So we're still a ways off from this even being a consideration for this team, but it's definitely something that if you want to ensure the future, keep the team here to 2050, which is when the Oklahoma City Thunder are now like committed to OKC, that's something that's going to need to get done sooner rather than later, I would think, or at least have plans in the motion for all that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Just kind of looking bigger picture at the Western Conference this year, maybe transitioning a little bit away from like the Pelicans. What are some of the teams that you've seen like play this year that you're kind of like the most impressive in the West? Is it Denver and then everyone else, or is there maybe a team or two that can maybe challenge them this year?
Yeah, it's definitely Denver until proven otherwise. I think I don't really, at least in this moment, see a dominant team in the West. I think it would be Denver if they were a little bit healthier, but Jamal Murray's missed a lot of games. He was very key for them, obviously, in their, NBA Finals run last season, but he's only played 11 games this year, right? They're losing a little bit of depth, but that can get masked by a guy like Murray coming back. Christian Brown has really stepped up for them. I think Reggie Jackson has been good as well. So I think they're going to ultimately end up being okay and finishing at the top of the Western Conference when it comes to everything. But I'll be honest, Minnesota is a team that's really impressed me. They obviously haven't won a playoff series in 20 years. So it's kind of one of those things of, okay, I'm not going to believe them fully just yet. But that defense is legit. Rudy Gobert is back to looking like Rudy Gobert. They have the best defense in the league by a good bit too. And when you have a guy, in Anthony Edwards, who's a go-to scorer, a guy that can put up 50 any given night. That's how you win in the playoffs, I think, is a guy like him just going off and being, more or less unguardable. He's been great for them this season. Karl Anthony Towns has been able to kind of slide more into a complementary role, which maybe means he shows up in the playoffs more than he has in the past. So I've looked at them, and I think they're really, really good as well. And those are right now, in my opinion, the top two teams in the Western Conference. But there's a lot that are competitive. OKC is doing it. Dallas has started to get into form too. There's no easy out there. I'm sure Phoenix, now that their big three is hopefully going to be playing soon, is going to finally kind of get back into the mix here too. So it still remains to be seen. But right now, it really is like Denver is who I trust more than anybody else.
The team that's really probably surprised me out of all of them is like I'm surprised like all of these moves that Dallas has made has like really kind of like worked out in their favor in a lot of ways. Where like the Derek Lively pick is like a home run right now. The Grant
Mm-hmm.
Williams trade is good. I still wish they wouldn't have done the Kyrie Irving thing because I just with Luca and Kyrie's that's your nucleus. It's kind of like they just have to have the formula of like they just become unguardable and then like elevate their defense a little bit. If you're talking about like big picture, like competing for the NBA championship. But yeah, I agree. I think it's probably Denver until unless if Denver's healthy, they're going to be like tough as heck to like really knock out. Um, Golden State Warriors here sitting 10-13. Draymond punches Nurkic, suspended indefinitely. Not sure, how long he'll be out with that. Klay Thompson looks washed. They just look really small in a lot of areas. The draft picks that they've kept haven't necessarily like ever really like, the bloom on that flower never really blossomed. What is the next step with this team? Because it feels like they like I was trying to think about this to try and come up with some sort of a video, but I feel like the option is like just because Draymond Green just seems like he's becoming too big of a problem, you have to like maybe you have the Pistons who are on like a 20 game losing streak. Maybe you try and like trade Draymond Green for like 3 or 4 pieces. I really don't know where the Warriors go from here.
Yeah, I don't know either. And I don't know if there's really much they can do other than maybe changing their starting lineup, which I think would help them. And you saw Steve Kerr do that in the second half of that game against the Suns, and it got them kind of back into that one. I thought get playing more of a guy like Podziemski and some others too. I think we're really good getting Kevin Looney out of the starting lineup there really did seem to help them. But look, the Draymond Green suspension's a really big deal for them. Their margin for error, when it comes to winning and losing is like thin this year, partially because, as you mentioned, Klay Thompson doesn't look good. He doesn't look good at all right now. And then guys like Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody just haven't developed like they hoped they would have. That 2 timelines plan they tried like really failed if those guys don't develop, and it sets you back a really long time. They're not, starter level guys that can step up and replace some of the aging veterans and things like that. They don't have draft picks for the future. It's like, what do you do with that? You also have, a brand new arena that you want to keep full with people. They're an expensive team when it comes to the luxury tax and all of those things. Can you just necessarily blow it up? Are you going to still generate money the same way you did before when you got all of these bills coming due? And so that's why I think they're just going to kind of keep going forward till basically the wheels fall off. But you need a guy like Draymond Green out there. There was a 3-point loss to the Phoenix Suns. And who knows if Draymond Green plays more than the 16 minutes he played in that one, if you're able to win the game because of that. And in a very competitive Western Conference, a game or two might be how you get left out of the postseason entirely versus making it in. But you definitely see the window closing, the doors slamming shut on their championship aspirations, the dynasty that they've had. It's just how much are they willing to run it into the ground? And I just don't see another path forward. Like, who else is going to take on Chris Paul this season? Can you flip him for anything? And I don't really see that being the case. Those are the kind of problems I think that they've really run into. And I think they're just going to hope on like Steph Curry to be able to carry them. But, he's 35 too. Does he start to hit a wall eventually, like we've seen it with Klay Thompson? And that's a very scary thought if you're Warriors. So, like, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know if that'll end up being the case, but I wouldn't be shocked if we end up seeing them missing the postseason this year.
Yeah, I think if they flip Chris Paul, it would be like the Westbrook thing last year at the Lakers, where they flip him for like some contracts, and then like he might maybe gets traded back to the Wizards, and they like buy out his contract or something.
Mm-hmm.
This will be like the last question I ask you here. We're getting into trade season. People are throwing out names, and every time a name gets thrown out, the Lakers get popped up. And if somebody like a Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan are other teams like in the West just kind of looking at the Lakers and they're like, please trade 2 or 3 guys for one piece again. Do that again. Make a Russell Westbrook 2.0 mistake again, Lakers. Please do that. Is that because for me personally, I think the Lakers are better if it's 80 and LeBron are your 2 pillars. Maybe you have like some guards that can create the offense, and then you just build this team around like depth and role players.
Yeah, I mean that's what they should be doing. I think when you look at them, right, like they need a little bit more juice on offense, certainly, but that defense is how they're able to win games. They are very much a defensive team, 7th in the league, they're 21st on offense. They thrive when they can like force turnovers, right? I wonder if you trade some of that depth, and they're built with a lot of athletes in mind too. Guys that can kind of just go get it on the defensive side of the ball. Like Cam Reddish has been really good for them. Torian Prince is doing that too. Hachimura does that as well. Even Jackson Hayes, who I'm not a big fan of. They're like athletes on that side of the ball. If you get rid of some of those guys, how much does that defense suffer? And then do you run into a problem trying to integrate some of the new guy offensively? If you add Zach LaVine into this, how much are you going to lose on the defensive side of the ball? And I'd wager a very good bit. And does that give you enough offense? It could, but there's only one ball to go around, and Zach LaVine is a very ball-centric player between him, LeBron James, and then does that leave Anthony Davis frozen out a little bit too? He needs guards to give him the ball. The Lakers don't have that. Zach LaVine's not amazing at entry passes. Does that mean Anthony Davis takes a back seat when he's been playing really well offensively? And so it's one of those things where like it really feels that like a significant trade, like a big name player coming in, would just throw off the balance that's working enough for them. I mean, they're 15-10. They just won the in-season tournament. Weak way to kind of go about it. And that's, as a guy who covers New Orleans, saying that too. So I don't know if that's the move they want to make, or if they should just kind of like put their heads down and go forward. But with LeBron James there and him potentially getting impatient, who really knows what they're going to be forced to do. But I think most executives in the Western Conference are like, make some sort of big trade, Lakers. Like, let's see if that works out, and kind of banking on it not.
Yeah, just look if the Lakers want to be successful, look at how they won that 2020 title. I know it's a bubble, so people think there's like an asterisk to it, but like that team wasn't fake. They were the number 1 seed in the West. They built this team with like just like an arsenal of guards. They had like a lot of depth, and I think them just being like big and feeding into like just like every matchup that you're going into, like we're gonna be bigger and more athletic than you. I just really think that's the way that the Lakers should go with that. Jake, thank you for your time here. Really appreciate it. Can you tell us where we can find all of your work, and then we'll head out of here?
Yeah, absolutely. You just search Locked On Pelicans wherever you get your podcast. It's on YouTube as well. Same for Locked On NBA. It's there Monday through Friday, both those, breaking down the biggest stories around the Pelicans and the association. And I'm on Twitter. It's @NolaJake.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Thank you.